That document was locked in my vault. You broke my cipher.
I would not get far if I ran.
Put the candle down.
Lord Marchfield.
She exists here under my protection. The documents, please. The portfolio is empty.
I was an agent, Beaulieu, not merely your instrument.
She was asleep in his private library at midnight. A document in her hands that should have been locked inside his vault. A document that could start a war. Duke Cassian Blackwood stood in the doorway, candle in hand, fury rising in his chest like a storm front. He never kept idle servants. He had dismissed men twice her size for far less. But then the candlelight caught her face, and something ancient and dangerous shifted inside him. Something he had never felt before. Something he could not name. Yet, welcome to the Royal Duke Diaries, where every secret has a price, and every forbidden love costs everything. The clock on the mantel had just struck midnight when Cassian Blackwood returned to Ashenmore Hall from the War Council in London. He did not announce his arrival. He never did. His staff knew better than to expect warmth or ceremony from him. They knew only two things with certainty: that the Duke of Ashenmore demanded perfection in all things, and that failure in his household was a very short road to a very permanent dismissal. He handed his coat to the night footman without looking at him, already moving down the corridor toward the east wing. He had documents to review, maps, cipher reports from the border agents his solicitor insisted on calling, contractors to keep the crown out of it. The council had been useless tonight. A dozen old men arguing about positions they would never occupy on a battlefield they would never see. Cassian had sat through it with his jaw locked and his hands flat on the table, saying less than 10 words and watching everything. He always watched everything. The library door was ajar. He stopped. He had left it locked. He was certain of it. He was always certain. He pushed it open slowly, quietly, without the anger that was already building in his chest, because anger made noise and noise was wasteful. Better to see first, understand first, react with precision rather than impulse. The fire had burned low in the grate, casting the room in deep amber and long shadows. The leather chairs near the window were empty. The reading table was not. She was seated at it, her dark head resting on her folded arms, one hand still loosely holding a sheet of paper. Her cap had come half off, releasing a coil of dark hair that fell across her cheek. Her breathing was slow and even. She was completely, utterly asleep. She was also wearing the pale gray uniform of his housemaids, and the paper in her hand. Cassian's eyes moved to it with the sharp, assessing focus of a man who had spent 15 years learning which details mattered and which did not. The paper in her hand was covered in a sequence of numerical codes that he had written himself 3 weeks ago and locked in the iron strongbox behind the false panel in his study wall. The strongbox required 2 keys, his key and the key currently around his neck. He crossed the room without making a sound. He reached the table. He looked down at her. She was young, younger than he had expected, given what she'd apparently managed. Perhaps 24 or 25, with high cheekbones and a mouth that was slightly parted in sleep, soft and entirely unguarded. Her lashes were dark against her skin. The hand holding his classified document had ink stains on the fingers. He reached out and took the paper from her grip. She did not wake. He looked at the document. Then he looked at the table surface, and his chest did something complicated. There were more papers, a dozen at least, spread in an organized pattern he recognized, not the haphazard scatter of someone rifling through stolen documents in panic. An organized arrangement, a working arrangement. She had been cross-referencing. There were her own notes beside his encoded correspondence, neat, precise handwriting in a hand he did not recognize. And there were translations, correct translations, his cipher, the one his best intelligence man, Colonel Hartley, had spent 4 months constructing, and another 2 months failing to crack before Cassian had been forced to create a secondary system just to communicate with his own agents. She had broken it, in his library, in his maidservant's uniform, asleep. Cassian pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He set the document on the table. He laced his fingers together and he looked at her, and he waited. She woke to the particular silence that has weight. Elara came out of sleep quickly, the way she always did, her mind arriving before her body had quite caught up. She lifted her head, blinked, and understood in the space of 2 seconds exactly what had happened. She had fallen asleep. She never fell asleep. She had done this 17 times in 18 months, and she had never fallen asleep. The fire was low. The papers were still on the table. She reached for them automatically and stopped. A man was sitting across from her, a large man, immaculately dressed despite the hour, with dark hair and darker eyes and an expression that conveyed absolutely nothing at all. He was watching her with the kind of focused, patient attention that she associated with predators waiting for their moment. She recognized him. Everyone in England recognized him. Duke Cassian Blackwood, the most feared political operative in the House of Lords. 3 separate prime ministers had learned, to their lasting regret, that opposing him was a project with diminishing returns. He had never married. He had no known weaknesses. He was 32 years old, and already a legend of the kind that people spoke about in whispers. He was also, according to everything she had been told by the man who had sent her here, supposed to be in London until Thursday. It was Tuesday. Elara did not move. She had learned very early that movement was often the thing that got people killed. Stillness was controlled. Stillness was time to think. "You broke my cipher," Cassian Blackwood said. His voice was low and even. With no inflection, she could use it to gauge what came next. "I would like to know how." She said nothing. Something shifted in his expression. Not anger. Something more like recalibration. "You're not going to run." "I wouldn't get far," she said. "No," he agreed. "You wouldn't." He reached forward and turned one of her note pages toward him, studying it. "This took hardly 6 months to get 40% of. You appear to have gotten 80, and you did it by hand, tonight, while working a housemaid's shift." He set the page back down. "Who are you?" "My name is listed in your household registry," she said carefully. "Elara Vane, 3rd housemaid, employed 8 weeks ago through the Morrison agency." "That's what your name is," he said. "Not who you are." She looked at him. He looked at her. The fire crackled once and settled. "I was trained," she said at last, because he clearly already knew enough that lying further would only demonstrate that she was both a thief and a liar, and she needed him to believe at least one thing about her before this night ended. "I was trained in applied cryptography and pattern analysis, privately. I'm not at liberty to say by whom." "Not at liberty," he repeated, "in my library, at midnight, with my classified correspondence." "Who sent you here?" "I can't tell you that." "Can't," he said, "or won't." "Both." Another silence. He was thinking. She could feel it. Not the performing thought that most men did when they wanted to appear intelligent, but actual processing, rapid and deep, the kind that usually preceded a decision she would not enjoy. "The document you were working from," he said, nodding toward the page nearest her hand. "That's not from my cipher file. It's from my personal correspondence drawer, which requires my key. I'm aware. My key is currently around my neck. I know where it is." He went very still. "You copied it. A wax impression, 2 weeks ago." She held his gaze because looking away would feel like losing something. "I didn't steal it. I returned the original. I never intended to take anything from this house that could not be replaced. And yet here we are," he said quietly, "with my intelligence documents in the hands of a housemaid who is, as it turns out, not a housemaid." "I am a housemaid," Elara said. "I scrubbed those floors. I aired those curtains. I polished every piece of silver in your dining room twice because your head housekeeper believes in thoroughness, and I had no grounds to refuse without drawing attention. I have been genuinely employed in this house. What I do in the hours between midnight and 4 in the morning is separate." He looked at her for a long moment. "You've been doing this for 8 weeks, he said slowly. "Every night between midnight and 4. Most nights, not everyone. And you've been sleeping during the days on reduced shifts. When I can. Tonight you couldn't." "Tonight I made a mistake," she said quietly. "I'm aware of that." Something moved across his face. It was not what she expected. It was not the fury she had prepared for, the cold dismissal, the hand reaching for the bell pull to summon the magistrate. It looked, for just a moment, almost like reluctant respect. Then it was gone, buried under composure so thorough it might never have existed. He stood. He was taller than she had realized. The portraits in the downstairs hall did not adequately convey it. There was something about the way he occupied space that made the room feel considered rather than large. "You will come to my study at 7 in the morning, he said. "You will bring every document you have worked on, every note you have made, and every transcription you have produced in this house. You will tell me what you found, what you believe it means, and for whom you were finding it. He gathered the papers from the table with careful, practiced movements. "In exchange, I will not have you arrested tonight. And tomorrow night?" she said. He paused at the door. "That depends," he said, without turning. "Entirely on what you tell me." He left. The door did not close fully behind him. Elara sat in the amber-lit library for a full 2 minutes, listening to his footsteps recede down the corridor, and then she put her face in her hands and breathed. She had 17 hours to decide how much of the truth she could afford to tell him. She did not sleep again that night. She went back to the servants' quarters, undressed, lay down on the narrow cot, and stared at the ceiling while the house settled around her and the other maids breathed in their quiet, honest sleep. She thought about the papers, about how much he had already understood, about the fact that he had sat across from her for a full 10 minutes, without calling for anyone, without making threats beyond the bare minimum required by the situation, and had asked her, not accused, not demanded, but asked, how she had broken his cipher. That was not the response of a man who intended to simply hand her to the magistrate. That was the response of a man who wanted to use her. The question was whether she could survive being used by Cassian Blackwood. At 5 in the morning she rose, dressed, and reported for her early shift, because not doing so would create exactly the kind of attention she could not afford. She cleaned 2 upstairs corridors and polished the candlesticks in the dining room, and accepted a bowl of porridge from the kitchen without tasting it, and by 7 o'clock she was standing outside his study door with a folder of documents pressed against her chest. She knocked. Enter. He was already at his desk, dressed, apparently rested, papers organized before him with the efficiency of a man who had been awake for hours and intended to stay that way. The curtains were open. The morning light came in cold and gray, and there was coffee on the side table. He looked up when she entered. His eyes went to the folder in her arms. "Sit down." She sat in the chair across from his desk, set the folder on the surface between them, and folded her hands in her lap. She had made her decision in the dark before dawn. Enough truth to be credible, enough withholding to protect the people she had promised to protect. It was a narrow path, and she was very good at narrow paths. "The man who sent you," Cassian said without preamble, "does he work for the Crown?" "Indirectly. That is a word that covers a great deal of ground. He operates in the space between official channels and necessary work," she said. "I'm told the Foreign Office knows he exists. I'm told they prefer not to know more than that." "I'm told many things," Cassian said. "I believe very little of them." He opened the folder, glanced at the first page, and his jaw tightened slightly. "You translated the Marlin correspondence. The first 6 letters, yes." "And what did you conclude?" Elara took a breath. "That someone in the Duke of Ashenmore's household, or with direct access to the Duke of Ashenmore's correspondence, has been providing encrypted intelligence to a network operating out of the eastern provinces. The coding structure suggests they're not working alone. There's a coordinating voice in the messages, someone who knows your movements, your habits, your schedule." She paused. "Your arrivals and departures, specifically." The silence stretched. "You think I have a spy in my house," he said. "I think you have at least one person who has been systematically feeding information about you to an outside party for a minimum of 11 months, she said. "The earliest coded letter I found was dated 11 months ago." He looked at her steadily. "And you were sent here to find this person." "I was sent here to confirm the intelligence existed, identify its scope, and deliver the decoded material to my employer." She held his gaze. "I was not sent here to destroy you, Your Grace. Quite the opposite. The man who sent me believes the information being extracted from your household represents a significant threat to English interests, and that you have a right to know about it." "Then why not simply come to me directly?" "Because the man who sent me was not certain you were not the source." Another silence. Different this time. She watched him process that, the particular set of his face as he understood that he had been investigated as a potential traitor, that someone had sent a codebreaker into his household wearing an apron because they were not yet sure he could be trusted. She expected anger. She was prepared for anger. She was not prepared for the quiet, almost tired thing that passed through his eyes before he controlled it. "How long did it take you to determine I wasn't?" he asked. 3 weeks, she said. "Your correspondence is private and consistent. Your financial records are clean. Your behavior in this household follows patterns that suggest a man who is exactly what he appears to be. Someone with power and the discipline to use it without corruption." She paused. "You fired your last steward for skimming 15 shillings from the household accounts. 16, he corrected automatically. The point is that men who betray their country for profit don't usually terminate a 6-year employment over 16 shillings. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Open the folder to page 8, he said. She did. It was a letter. Handwritten. Not coded. Read it. She read it. It was dated 3 days ago, addressed to Cassian Self from someone identified only as M. The content was a warning that an intelligence operative had been placed inside Ashenmore Hall, tasked with extracting documents, that this operative was dangerous, that she should be removed before she could complete her work. Elara looked up from the page. Cassian was watching her face. This arrived yesterday, he said, before I left London. It's part of the reason I came back early. The person who sent it described you quite accurately. Dark hair, slight build, works the upper corridors on early shifts. His eyes moved over her face with the same precise attention she was beginning to understand, was simply how he looked at things. What I find interesting is that the letter describes your mission as a theft, not an investigation, not a protection, a theft. Elara's fingers tightened on the edge of the page. The man who sent that letter, she said, is either wrong about my purpose, or he is the person I was sent here to find. Cassian leaned back in his chair. Yes, he said quietly. That's what I thought too. The morning that followed had a quality she had not experienced before in any assignment. The peculiar charged atmosphere of two people discovering they are on the same side, despite arriving from opposite directions. He showed her the full cache of suspicious correspondence he had identified himself. Yes, he had noticed something was wrong, had been noticing for months, had been building a quiet parallel investigation while publicly behaving as though nothing was amiss. He was, she realized, considerably more intelligent than even his reputation suggested. He had identified 7 of the 11 compromised letters. She had found the other 4. Together, by mid-morning, they had a pattern. Household accounts, she said, pointing to the date sequences. Every transmission coincides with a day when a household expense report was filed. Someone who handles the accounts, or has access to whoever does, Cassian said, standing beside her at the table, close enough that she was very aware of him in a way she could not afford to be. He smelled of coffee and something darker, leather and cold air, and his presence had a particular quality of compression, as though the air around him was denser than normal. She moved slightly to the left to create a more professional distance. He noticed. She could tell from the fractional pause before he reached past her to turn a page. But he said nothing. 3 candidates, she said, based on the access window and the timing. Your head of accounts, Mr. Fevered, your secretary, Mr. Linz, or your housekeeper, Mrs. Dole. Mrs. Dole has been with this house for 23 years, Cassian said, which makes her the most trusted person with the broadest access, Elara said. I'm not saying it's her, I'm saying she cannot be excluded. He was quiet for a moment. What do you need to confirm? Access to the account records for the past 12 months, cross-referenced with the letter dates. And ideally, something that would tell me which of those 3 people was present in this house during each transmission window. I can have that for you by this afternoon, he said. She looked at him. You're going to help me. I'm going to help myself, he said. You happen to be useful to that process. He moved back to his desk, and there was something in the deliberate return to professional distance that felt almost like a mirror of what she had done. You'll continue your work here, not as a housemaid, a slight pause, or rather, you'll maintain the appearance of continuing as a housemaid because removing you suddenly would alert our target. But your actual work will be here, with those documents. And my employer? You may tell your employer that you are continuing the investigation, he said. You will not tell him that I know about it. She considered that. That puts me in a difficult position. Yes, he said, without apology. It does. But consider the alternative. If your employer and the person who wrote that letter are the same person, then reporting back to him right now tells him exactly what we found and gives him time to disappear. He looked at her directly. I think you already knew this. I think that's why you didn't run last night when you woke up and found me sitting across from you. She had no response to that, because he was right. Fine, she said. Good. He pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him. What name should I call you? Not Vane. That's clearly false. She hesitated for only a moment. Elara is real. Elara, he said, writing it down, and the way he said it, flatly, precisely, without any inflection at all, was somehow worse than if he had said it softly. 3 days passed, then 4, then a week. The shape of their days became a thing she would not have predicted and could not quite explain. By morning she maintained the fiction of her household duties, working alongside the other maids, earning no particular distinction. By afternoon she was in his study, working. By evening he was sometimes there too, and sometimes not, and on the evenings he was there, they would work in a silence that grew progressively less uncomfortable. He was not warm. She did not expect warmth, but he was something that she found, in its own way, more difficult to navigate. He was consistently honest. If she made an error in her analysis, he told her so directly and without cruelty. If her reasoning was sound, he said that too. He did not perform interest in her work. He simply had it, the genuine, focused interest of a man who respected competence wherever he found it, apparently regardless of the vessel it arrived in. She caught him looking at her sometimes. Not the way men often looked at her, the assessing, acquiring look that she had learned to make herself invisible against, but something different, something that felt more like puzzlement, as if she were a problem he had not yet solved to his satisfaction and could not set aside. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself many things that week. On the 8th day, something shifted. It began in the evening when Lord Marchfield arrived. She knew who Marchfield was. Everyone did. 40 years old, handsome in the polished, expensive way of men who have never been told no, connected enough to the crown that most people smiled at his jokes, regardless of whether they were funny. He was also, she knew from certain intelligence reports she had read in a previous assignment, the kind of man who collected beautiful things and took great offense when they did not stay collected. He arrived for dinner, and he saw her in the corridor when she was carrying a tray from the kitchen to the upper landing. Most men in his position would have looked through her. She was a housemaid. She was furniture. Marchfield did not look through her. "Well," he said, stopping in the middle of the corridor with the entitled ease of a man who believed corridors existed for his comfort. "I don't believe I've seen you before." "I'm new, my lord," she said, keeping her eyes correctly lowered, her posture correctly deferential. "Are you?" It was not a question. "What's your name?" "Vane, my lord." "Vane." He said it like he was tasting it. "You have extraordinary eyes, Vane. I hope nobody in this household has told you otherwise." She said nothing, because there was no good answer. "My lord," she said instead, "I'm needed in the upstairs corridor." "Of course you are." He smiled, and it did not reach his eyes. "We'll speak again." She moved past him and continued up the staircase without hurrying, because hurrying would have looked like fear, and fear was information she refused to provide. She did not know that Cassian Blackwood, emerging from the library door at the end of the corridor, had seen the entire exchange. Dinner was a trial. She knew that because Mrs. Dole came to the kitchen afterward, looking pinched around the mouth, and told the staff that Lord Marchfield would be staying overnight, possibly 2 nights, and that his personal standards were to be accommodated without exception. Elara received this information calmly, returned to the upper corridor, and mentally adjusted her working hours. She would not be able to access the study while Marchfield was in the house. Too much foot traffic in the evening, too many eyes. At 10 o'clock she was in the corridor outside the dining room, collecting the after-dinner glasses from the side table, when the door opened and the men came out. She pressed herself toward the wall instinctively, eyes down, invisible. Marchfield was speaking. "Always maintain that a house reflects the man who owns it," he was saying, with the satisfied authority of someone making a pronouncement. "And Ashenmore is exceptional. Every detail is perfect." She could feel even from her position against the wall. Even the staff. "The staff are employed for their competence," Cassian said. His voice was flat. Pleasant flat. The kind of flat that was actually very far from pleasant. Nothing else. "Of course," Marchfield said, amused. "Though I would note that competence and beauty are not mutually exclusive. The girl in the corridor earlier, I didn't catch your full name." "No reason you would," Cassian said. She seemed interesting. "She is a housemaid," Cassian said. "She is here to maintain this house. I would ask you to remember that." The silence that followed had a particular texture. She could hear Marchfield recalibrating, the way people did when they encountered unexpected resistance. "Naturally," he said, his tone shifting just slightly toward something more careful. "I meant nothing improper." "Of course not," Cassian said. She did not look up as they passed, but she felt Cassian Blackwood's gaze on her as he went by, brief and precise, checking, cataloging, and then gone, as if he needed to confirm she was unharmed and the confirmation was a matter of efficiency rather than concern. She thought about that for longer than was sensible. Marchfield departed on the morning of the 2nd day, which was also the morning that Elara found the final piece. She had spent the previous night, in the 3 hours between Marchfield's household going quiet and her usual working window, reviewing the account files Cassian had delivered to her. She had gone through them systematically, building a chart of dates and personnel cross-references, and at 3 in the morning she had found it. Not Mrs. Dole, not Mr. Fevered, Mr. Linz, the secretary. Except it was not quite Mr. Linz. It was his handwriting on the account records, yes, but those records had been altered, subtly. The kind of alteration that was invisible unless you were looking for it and knew exactly what pattern to look for. Someone had been accessing the files and making small, careful changes to create windows of access that would not appear in the official logs. But the handwriting on the alterations was not Linz's. It was close, very close. Close enough to fool anyone who was not specifically trained in document analysis. She had the document in front of her at 6 in the morning when Cassian appeared in his study doorway, clearly expecting to find the room empty. He stopped. She looked up. I found it. He came to the table. She showed him. She explained the handwriting analysis, the account alterations, the false access windows. She showed him how the pattern of changes created a recurring gap on the second Wednesday of each month, every single month, for the past 11 months, during which someone could access the secure correspondence files without the access being logged. The alterations in the account records are written in a hand that is meant to look like Linz's, she said. But the letter formations are subtly different. Whoever did this is very good. But they were trained in a different country's handwriting tradition. There are 3 letter forms that betray it. This person learned to write in French. Cassian was very still. Who in this household has a French education? She said. He was quiet for a moment that had a strange quality to it, dense with something she could not name. My previous secretary, he said, before Linz, a man named Boley. He left my employ 14 months ago. 14 months ago, she repeated. 1 month before the first transmission. He didn't leave, Cassian said slowly. I dismissed him. For accessing private correspondence. His jaw tightened. I was told he had left London. I was told he had returned to France. He didn't, Elara said. Or if he did, he came back. She turned another page. The man who sent me here told me to look for a current household member. He was very specific about that. He told me the source was inside the house. She looked up at Cassian. But Beaulieu isn't inside the house. He has someone inside the house. Someone who was already here, already trusted, who agreed to create the access windows for him. She paused. The question is who? They looked at each other across the table. Start with who knows my schedule, Cassian said quietly. Who knew I would be in London until Thursday? Her mind ran the list. Linz, Mrs. Dole, the head footman, his valet, a handful of others. Then she thought of something. The letter, she said. The one describing me as a thief. The one sent to warn you before you came home early. She turned to the page where she had set it aside. This person knew I was here, knew I had been placed here and what I was doing. Which means they knew my employer well enough to have intelligence about an operation my employer believed was secret. She looked up. Your spy isn't just accessing your correspondence. They're connected to the same network I was sent to investigate. They're inside it. Cassian Blackwood's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes went dark and very, very focused. That letter, he said carefully, was sent from London, from an address I know. Whose address? The man who recommended you through the Morrison agency, he said. I had him investigated when I received the letter. The agency is real. The placement records are real. But the man who made the original recommendation, the man your employer used to place you in my household, his London address is connected to a property owned by a subsidiary of a company I can trace, through 4 layers of incorporation, back to a man called Beaulieu. The room went very quiet. He sent me here, Elara said slowly. To this house. He sent me to find his own operation. To find the evidence, Cassian said, before anyone else could. To retrieve it, she said. Not to expose it. To remove it, so it could never be used against him. She looked at the folder of documents on the table, the 11 months of decoded intelligence, the account alterations, the timeline. He wanted me to bring all of this to him. And you, Cassian said very quietly, were going to do that. The sentence hung between them. She met his gaze directly. I was doing my job, she said. I was following the instructions I had been given by a man I believed was working for English interests. I came here to protect you. The fact that I was being used to doing the opposite is something I only fully understood this morning. He was watching her face with that intense, unreadable focus. "I believe you," he said. The unexpectedness of it hit her like a physical thing. She had been braced for doubt, for justifiable skepticism, for the reasonable conclusion of a very intelligent man that she was exactly what the letter had said. A thief who would say anything now that she was caught. "Why?" she asked. "Because," he said, "if you were working for Bolo, you would have taken those documents the first night you had access to my strongbox, and you would have been gone. You've been here 8 weeks, doing your actual job alongside your hidden one, because you genuinely believed you were protecting something." He leaned forward slightly. "Also, you told me about the handwriting analysis before I could have verified it independently. If you were still working against me, you would have held that back." She exhaled slowly. "What do we do now?" she said. "Now," he said. Standing with the decisive movement of a man who has finished thinking and begun acting, we set a trap. The trap required patience, which was fortunate, because patience was something they both had in abundance. Cassian drafted a false cipher communication, placed it in the correspondence file, and restored the account records to their altered state as though the investigation had never happened. He restored the appearance of the second Wednesday access window, and then he waited. Elara went back to her corridor, her tray, her early shift, her correct deference in the presence of people who did not see her. She was very good at being invisible. She had been doing it for years. But she found, over the days that followed, that she was increasingly visible to one person who could not be avoided. Cassian Blackwood, Duke of Ashenmore, had developed the habit of finding her. Not obviously. Not in any way that could be noticed or remarked upon. But she would be polishing the banisters and hear his step in the corridor and look up to find him passing with papers in his hand, and his gaze would move to her for just a moment, checking, confirming, the same brief acknowledgement, before he continued. Or she would be in the kitchen garden in the early morning, and the library window above would be open, and she would hear him moving within, and she knew he could see the garden from that window if he chose to look. She told herself it was professional. He was monitoring an asset. She was an investment he was protecting until the investment became useful. She told herself many things. On the 11th day, she was in the upstairs corridor at dusk, relighting the candles in their wall sconces, when she heard Marchfield's voice. He had returned. She had not known he was coming back. "There she is," he said, and there was something in his tone that was different from the first time, more certain, more proprietorial, as though the days between had given him time to decide she was something he intended to have. "Vane, I've been thinking about you." She kept her voice level, her expression carefully blank. "My lord." "Put the candle down for a moment. I need to finish the corridor, my lord." I said put the candle down. She set it in its holder on the side table. She turned to face him with the composed, neutral expression of a woman who has learned that composure is the only defense that cannot be taken from her. He was between her and the staircase. "You know," he said pleasantly, "I have significant influence in this house, with the Duke. If I were to suggest to him that a certain member of his staff deserved particular consideration, Lord Marchfield." The voice came from the corridor behind him. Cassian's voice, flat and exactly as cold as iron in winter. Marchfield turned. Cassian was standing at the far end of the corridor. He had apparently come up the back stairs, which meant either he had happened to arrive at this moment, or he had been watching and chosen his moment with great precision. She suspected the latter. "Cassian," Marchfield said, his tone recalibrating instantly, shifting to the easy warmth of men in equal power addressing each other. "I was just speaking with your girl here." "She is not my girl," Cassian said, moving down the corridor at an unhurried pace that was nonetheless somehow relentless. "She is employed in this house and exists here under my protection." He came to a stop between Elara and Marchfield, not quite facing either of them. A position choice, she noticed, that placed him between the two without making it look like a shield. "I believe I made this clear during your previous visit. You're very possessive of your staff," Marchfield observed. "I am very clear," Cassian said, "about the standards I maintain in this house. The conversation you were having with Miss Vane does not meet those standards. Dinner is at 8. I'll expect you downstairs." Marchfield looked at him, looked at Elara, smiled the smile of a man storing a grievance for later. "Of course," he said, and walked away. The corridor went quiet. Elara picked up the candle from the side table. Her hand was, she noted with distant annoyance, not entirely steady. "Are you all right?" Cassian asked. It was the first time in 11 days that he had asked her anything that was not about the investigation. She looked up at him. He was very close, corridor close, the kind of distance that in an open room would have felt appropriate, but in a narrow hallway felt like something else. "I'm fine," she said. "Thank you. He'll make your position here more difficult," Cassian said. "If he becomes persistent, you will tell me." "It wouldn't be the first time someone like him was persistent," she said. Something moved through his expression. "No," he said quietly. "I imagine it wouldn't be. That doesn't mean you are required to manage it alone." She looked at him, and there was a quality to the silence between them that was new and not entirely comfortable, and also, she thought, with the distant objectivity of someone observing themselves from outside, not unwelcome. "I'll remember that," she said. He nodded once, and stepped back, restoring the appropriate distance. She finished lighting the candles in the corridor, and she was very careful not to think about the way he had placed himself between her and Marchfield, or the flatness in his voice when he'd said she exists here under my protection, as though it were simply a fact, simple as geography, simple as the stone walls of this old house. She was very careful not to think about any of it. She failed completely. The second Wednesday came like a held breath finally released. Cassian had arranged everything with the quiet precision that seemed to characterize everything he did. The false document was in place. The account window was open. The household moved through its usual rhythms, entirely unaware that the day had a different purpose beneath its ordinary surface. Elara spent the morning at her corridor duties, her mind running through possibilities the way it always did when she was waiting. Not anxiety, exactly, but a kind of continuous, low-level calculation, the same part of her that ran ciphers running scenarios instead. She had thought, over the past days, about everything she knew and did not know, and there was one piece she kept returning to. The letter that had warned Cassian about her. The letter had been sent before he came home, before he found her. Which meant whoever was managing this operation had known she was in the house and had decided, at that point, that the investigation had gone far enough, that it was time to have her removed. But why then? What had happened at that exact moment to make him decide she needed to go? She had been in the house for 7 weeks at that point. 7 weeks of working, investigating, building the decoded picture. What had changed in week 7? She was still turning this over when, at 11 o'clock in the morning, she was summoned to Cassian's study. He was standing at the window when she entered, one hand braced on the frame, looking out at the grounds. He turned when she came in. "It was Lynn's," he said. She had expected it, but it still landed with weight. "You're certain?" "He accessed the false document this morning. I had the lock on the correspondence file fitted with a mechanism 2 days ago." "Ah, dust trace. Lynn's fingerprints are on the drawer. He also sent a coded message within the hour through the household accounts." Cassian moved away from the window. "He used your cipher, or rather, Bolu's cipher. He now knows I've broken," she said. "He now knows someone has broken," Cassian corrected. "The message was in a variant form. They've shifted the key since I found you in the library. Someone told them the original cipher was compromised. Lynn's told them, or Bolu already knew," Cassian said. "When you fell asleep, when I found you, did anything in the room suggest someone else had been there recently?" She thought back. The documents had been in the arrangement she had placed them. The papers had not been disturbed. "But the fire, she said. "It had been built up recently. I assumed one of the night staff had added coal before midnight, but the night staff don't enter the library." She paused. "Someone was in there before me. They may have seen what I was working on before I fell asleep. And then they sent the letter to have you removed," Cassian said, "before you could finish and deliver the decoded material." His jaw tightened. "They thought I would arrest you, or at minimum dismiss you. They expected the investigation to disappear with you. They didn't expect you to believe me," she said. "They underestimated the value of someone who can break their own cipher." He moved to the desk and picked up a sealed envelope. "Lynn's are still in this house. I have not acted on it yet because acting now would alert Bola that the trap worked, and I would rather have Bola than Lynn's." He set the envelope down. "I need you to send a message." She looked at him carefully. "To my employer. To whoever you would normally report to," he said. "Tell them you've made progress. Tell them you've identified the source, and will have the complete decoded correspondence ready for transfer within 48 hours. Use whatever communication method you normally use. And when will they respond? When they respond, we'll know if your contact and Bolu's contact are the same person." He met her eyes. I'm aware this puts you in a difficult position. You're asking me to potentially expose someone I've worked with, she said. I'm asking you to determine whether the person who sent you here was trying to protect England or betray it, he said. Which I believe you also want to know. She did. That was the uncomfortable truth of it. She had been doing this work for 3 years, moving through houses and offices and foreign embassies, in the honest belief that the man who directed her was using her skills in service of something real. The possibility that she had been used, that her genuine effort and her genuine skill had been directed toward an operation whose real purpose was the opposite of what she had been told. That possibility had been sitting in her chest for 11 days, like a coal. I'll send the message, she said. She used the dead drop on the eastern wall of the market square that she had established when she arrived in the village. A chalk mark on the third brick from the corner. A folded note inside a specific hollow in the stone. She had used it twice before to confirm her cover was holding. She wrote the message in the agreed cipher. Progress confirmed. Source identified. 48 hours to full extraction. She returned to the house and told Cassie it was done. He nodded. He told her to continue her normal duties and wait. The waiting was the hardest part. She had never been good at waiting. She was good at working, at the precise, absorbing labor of pattern analysis, at the physical occupation of her housemaid duties, at anything that gave her hands and mind a direction. Waiting was just the space where thoughts you did not want had room to expand. She thought about the investigation. She thought about Linz, still moving through this house with his pleasant professional manner, still managing Cassian's correspondence, still feeding the network. She thought about Beaulieu somewhere in London, confident that the woman in Ashenmore Hall was either arrested or dismissed and would not be delivering anything inconvenient. And she thought about Cassian, which was the thing she was least equipped to think about and therefore could not stop. He had changed over the days of working together, in the way that people change when they stop performing and start simply being. Not softer. He was not a soft man, and she did not think he ever had been, but more present. More direct in a way that had nothing to do with authority and everything to do with the particular honesty of someone who has decided another person is worth their actual attention. He noticed things about her. He noticed when she was tired and adjusted the pace of their evening work without comment. He noticed when something in the documents troubled her and waited, without filling the silence, until she was ready to articulate it. He had, without making a thing of it, stopped treating her like a complication to be managed and started treating her like a colleague. She was not sure which was more dangerous. The response came on the second day. Cassian brought it to her in the afternoon. A folded note, retrieved by one of his men from the dead drop. She read it. The handwriting was familiar. The cipher was familiar. The message was brief. Excellent. Proceed immediately. Bring everything to the Whitmore address on extraction. She looked up. The Whitmore address, she said. That's in London. It is, Cassian said. I had it traced this morning. The property belongs, through a sequence of transfers that my solicitor spent last night unraveling, to a man named Henry Beaulieu. He paused. Your employer has been corresponding from a location owned by the man we are investigating. The coal in her chest burned hotter. He's been working for Beaulieu the whole time, she said. Or he is Beaulieu, Cassian said, using a different identity with different contacts. She thought of the man she had worked with for 3 years. The measured voice, the careful instructions, the habit of providing just enough context to make the assignment clear and not a word more. She thought of the fact that she had never met him in person. Correspondence only. Dead drops and coded messages. She had trusted him with 3 years of her life because she had believed the work was real. What do you need from me? She said. Her voice came out steady, which she was grateful for. I need you to go to London, he said. I need you to appear to deliver what they're expecting. I'll have men in position at the Whitmore address before you arrive. He paused. You would be present when we take him. It will require you to be in proximity to someone who may, at that point, become dangerous. I've been in proximity to dangerous people before, she said. Yes, he said, and there was something in his voice that she did not examine. You have. A silence. When? She said. Tomorrow morning. Early. I'll travel separately. He looked at her steadily. Elara. It was the first time he had used her name without its being functionally necessary. She felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. You're going to tell me that I don't have to do this, she said. I was going to tell you, he said, that whatever happens tomorrow and whatever happened before tomorrow, You have acted throughout this investigation with more integrity than I have encountered in most people I've worked with, regardless of who they work for. I wanted you to know that before we go to London." She looked at him across the desk, the distance between them that was professional and careful and increasingly felt like a fiction both of them were maintaining with effort. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded. He looked back at the papers on his desk. "Get some sleep tonight," he said. "You've been sleeping 2 hours a night for a week. I can tell." "You can tell," she repeated. "You favor your left hand when you're tired. When you're rested, you're ambidextrous." She stared at him. He had noticed that. He had noticed that and filed it in the same quiet, precise way he filed everything. "Good night, Your Grace," she said. "Cassian," he said, without looking up. She left before she could say anything that she could not take back. London in the early morning had a particular quality, grey and cool and completely indifferent to whatever was about to happen in it, which Elara had always found, in its way, comforting. She arrived at the Whitmore address at 9 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio that contained copies of the decoded documents, copies only, the originals safely locked in Ashenmore Hall. She had dressed carefully. Not her housemaid uniform, but not her own best clothes either. Something in between, the appearance of a woman with profession and modest means, unremarkable. The address was a townhouse, narrow and well-kept, on a street with other narrow, well-kept townhouses. The kind of street that maintained appearances. She knocked. The door opened almost immediately, which told her someone had been watching. The man who opened it was someone she had never seen before. 40, with the particular blankness of a professional who does not invest emotion in his work. He looked at the portfolio in her hands and stood back to let her in. The entrance hall was sparse, functional, a house being used, not lived in. She was shown to a room at the back, a study, small, with curtains drawn against the morning light. There was a desk. There was a lamp. There was a man sitting at the desk. She looked at him. He was perhaps 55, silver-haired, with the fine-featured face that photographs well and memory loses quickly. The face of a man who had spent decades being exactly as visible or invisible as the situation required. He was well-dressed. He had a glass of something amber near his right hand, untouched. He was not who she expected. "Sit down, Elara," said the man, and she recognized his voice, the measured cadence, the careful precision, the voice from 3 years of correspondence now attached to a face she had never seen. She sat. "You've done excellent work," he said pleasantly. "Better than I expected, to be honest. The decoded correspondence is everything we needed." "Who are you?" she said. "You know who I am. I know what I thought you were," she said. "I want to know what you actually are." A slight smile. "A businessman, primarily, with certain political interests that require specific information. The Duke of Ashenmore has been a source of complications for some time. His reform efforts in Parliament, his connections with certain foreign agents, his ongoing interference with matters that were proceeding quite smoothly before he became involved." "You're Bola," she said. The smile did not change. "I use many names. You sent me into that house to retrieve evidence of your own operation," she said. "Not to expose it, to recover it. Evidence, when properly controlled, stops being evidence," he said. "In your portfolio, I presume?" "What happens after this?" she said. "After you have the portfolio?" "You'll be compensated as agreed," he said, generously. "This has been a complicated assignment. We'll find you another position in 3 months or so, something less taxing." He said it so easily, as though she were simply a piece of the mechanism, a key turning in a lock, a function with no particular preference about what the function was used for. "And the Duke?" she said. "The Duke," Beaulieu said, "will find that certain complications in his parliamentary work become significantly worse without the intelligence base he's been building. He will be, in time, neutralized. This is business, Elara, nothing personal. You put me in proximity to a man I would eventually come to..." She stopped. Beaulieu tilted his head with the faintly clinical interest of a man noticing something unexpected. "Come to what?" She said nothing. "How interesting," he said, after a moment. "You've developed an attachment. That is unfortunate. I did wonder, given the extended timeline. 8 weeks is rather long for an extraction that should have taken 4. He reached for the portfolio. "The documents, please." "The portfolio is empty," said Cassian Blackwood. He came through the door at the back of the room. Not the door she had entered through, but a second door, a narrow servant's entrance she had not noticed. He was followed by 2 men she did not recognize, and a third man she did. Colonel Hartley, his intelligence officer, the one who had spent 6 months failing to break the cipher. Beaulieu went very still. "The portfolio is empty," Cassian said again, coming to stand in the center of the room. "The originals are at Ashenmore Hall. The copies I sent here are of letters from my solicitor regarding drainage repairs on the northern estate." He looked at Beaulieu with the calm, final expression of a man who has been patient for a very long time. "Henry Beaulieu, also known as Henry Marchand, Charles Lafontaine, and at least 2 other names my solicitor has found, all connected to properties and business interests that have been systematically positioned to undermine specific English political operations over the past 6 years. You have been a problem for a very long time." Beaulieu looked at Elara. "You told him," he said. There was no anger in it, just the clean, analytical note of recalculation. "I told him the night he found me in his library," she said. "Everything except your identity, which I didn't know." She met his eyes. "You used me. You spent 3 years sending me into situations where I was genuinely trying to protect English interests, and the entire time you were pointing me at problems you'd created yourself. I was your instrument, not your agent." "There's no difference," Beaulieu said. "There is," she said. "I have one. You don't." Hartley moved forward. Beaulieu looked at the 2 men behind Cassian and at the closed curtains, and whatever calculation he ran reached its conclusion very quickly, because he sat back in his chair with a slight movement that was the gesture of a man accepting arithmetic he dislikes. "The man at the door," he said. "My men are already with him," Cassian said. He looked at Hartley. "Take him." The street outside was unremarkable in the way that London streets were unremarkable at 9 in the morning, full of commerce and movement and total indifference to the 2 people standing on the pavement in front of a townhouse that was now, quietly, being secured. Elara stood in the cold air and felt the particular emptiness of a finished thing. 3 years. 3 years of work that she had believed in, that had been real in the sense that her effort and skill and the long nights of it had been real, even if the purpose had been false. Cassian appeared beside her. She was aware of him standing close, not touching. There was still that consistent, careful distance, but close enough that she felt the warmth of him in the cold morning air. "Linz is in custody at Ashenmore," he said. "Hartley's team will travel this afternoon. Beaulieu will be transported within the hour." "How long were you watching him?" she said. "I began investigating the Beaulieu network 18 months ago," Cassian said, "through channels that have nothing to do with your operation. We were approaching from different directions. I believe we would have found each other eventually, one way or another." She looked at him. "The morning you left to send the message from the dead drop," he said, "I already knew where it was. I'd identified it in week 2. He met her gaze directly, with the honesty that she had come to understand was simply the way he operated. "I could have intercepted your communications at any point. I chose not to." "Why not?" "Because I wanted you to choose," he said. "I wanted the moment when you decided to work with me, rather than against me, to be entirely yours. Not because I removed your options, but because you assessed the situation and made a decision, as you did." She looked at the street, at the ordinary London morning moving around them, entirely unconcerned. "What happens to me now?" she said. "My cover is gone. My employer is in custody. I have no current position and a rather complicated professional history that probably cannot be put on a standard reference. You could work for me," he said. She turned to look at him. "Not as a housemaid," he said, and there was something in his voice that was very slightly different from its usual precise flatness, something that sounded, improbably, like the ghost of humor. "I have ongoing intelligence requirements that exceed what my current staff can handle. I've been managing with Hartley's people, who are competent but not gifted. You are gifted." He paused. "Officially, you would be listed as my private secretary for correspondence analysis. The actual role would be considerably more interesting." "You're offering me employment," she said. "I'm offering you something real to do," he said. "The work you were doing before was real, even if the direction was false. The skill is yours. The application can be yours, too." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had sat across from her in his library at midnight and asked how she broke his cipher instead of calling the magistrate, at the man who had stood between her and Marchfield in a corridor without making a performance of it, at the man who had noticed she favored her left hand when she was tired. "Cassian," she said. Something shifted in his face, the almost invisible shift she was learning to read. "You said something in that room," he said carefully. "You stopped yourself. You said you'd come to I know what I said, she said. A silence. The London street moved around them. A horse cart rattled past. Somewhere a church bell struck the quarter hour. The work, he said. Would that be sufficient reason for you to come back to Ashenmore? You know it wouldn't be sufficient reason, she said. You know that's not why. He looked at her steadily. Then tell me why. She had spent 11 days being very careful and very professional and very clear with herself about the nature of the situation and the appropriate emotional response to it, and she was exceedingly tired of all of it. Because I found you, she said, extraordinary. And I have found very few people extraordinary in my life, and I am not particularly interested in walking away from something that is extraordinary simply because the context was unconventional. The silence that followed was the longest she had ever experienced. Then Cassian Blackwood, Duke of Ashenmore, who had been described by 3 prime ministers as the most controlled man in English politics, reached out and took her hand. Not urgently, not dramatically, with the same deliberate precision he applied to everything, as though he had made the decision, confirmed it was correct, and was now acting on it. His hand around hers was warm and certain, and the opposite of everything she had expected when she fell asleep in his library 2 weeks ago. Come back to Ashenmore, he said quietly. Yes, she said. The return was different. Everything about Ashenmore Hall looked the same. The pale stone facade, the long approach through the grounds, the ordered formality of the entrance. But the way she moved through it had changed, and the way the house received her had changed, because the house received what its master brought into it, and what he brought in now was different. She did not return to the servants' quarters. She was shown by a Mrs. Dole who was navigating the situation with the tight-lipped professionalism of a woman who intended to adjust to new circumstances without comment, to a set of guest rooms in the East Wing. She unpacked her small case, which did not take long, because she had spent her life with small cases, and sat in the window of her new room and looked at the grounds and tried to locate herself in this new version of things. She was not entirely sure what she was here. Not a housemaid. That was over. Not a guest exactly. Not yet whatever she might eventually be. She was in the space between definitions, which was, she reflected, not an unfamiliar place. There was a knock at the door. Come in, Cassian. He had changed out of the London clothes and was in his ordinary Ashenmore clothes. Dark and practical, no different in quality but different in the way he wore them, slightly more himself. He was carrying 2 books. These are yours, he said, setting them on the side table. You left them in the study. She looked at the books. They were not hers. They were from his library, books she had borrowed and not yet returned. You could have had someone bring them, she said. Yes, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. There was the familiar charged silence, except that it was not as managed as it had been before. The walls were thinner now, the careful professional maintenance of appropriate distance, somewhat the worse for 2 weeks of circumstances that had been neither professional nor appropriate. Sit down, she said, because she was tired of doing the very precise emotional mathematics of where they were standing relative to each other. He sat in the chair by the window. She sat across from him. The investigation, she said. After today, what comes next? There will be formal proceedings, I imagine. A hearing. Hartley will manage the official elements, he said. Beaulieu will be tried quietly, not publicly. Too much of what he knows about operational intelligence is better kept from a courtroom. He paused. You will need to make a statement. I've asked that it be done here, with a degree of privacy, given that your identity as an operative cannot be officially acknowledged. My work for the past 3 years, she said. If it was all directed by Beaulieu, then the assignments he gave you were real even if his purpose was not, Cassian said. I've spoken to Hartley. The intelligence you produced over 3 years was used in ways Beaulieu could not fully control. Some of it passed through channels that ended up serving English interests despite his intentions. You are not at fault. You were used by someone you trusted. That's not the same as complicity. She nodded slowly. I know that, she said, in my head. The other part takes longer, he said. She looked at him. Is that from experience? I employed Beaulieu's man for 14 months, he said quietly. I dismissed him because I caught him accessing correspondence. I thought I had resolved the problem. I did not investigate further. I told myself it was resolved because it was convenient to believe that, and because I did not want to spend the time and attention the full investigation would require. I was wrong, and the 11 months that followed, the transmissions, the intelligence extracted from this house, That is partly the result of my complacency. You can't have investigated every dismissed employee, she said. I can be honest about the fact that I knew something was wrong and chose the easier conclusion, he said. His jaw was tight. We each carry our share of this. She was quiet for a moment. You're a very particular kind of person, she said. How so? Most people, when they are in a position of power, do not spend much time examining their own failures. They explain them. Distribute the responsibility outward. You don't do that. I find it inefficient, he said. If I distribute the responsibility, I retain the failure. Better to acknowledge it and correct it. That's not why, she said. He looked at her. That's the reason you tell yourself, she said. Because it sounds like pragmatism. But actually you do it because you have a very strict idea of what a person ought to be, and you hold yourself to it more rigorously than you hold anyone else to it. She paused. I've been watching you for 2 weeks. I'm aware, he said dryly. You're very hard on yourself. Are you concerned about me? He said, and there was the ghost of something in his voice. Not quite amusement, not quite warmth, but something in the family of both. Yes, she said simply. The ghost became something more, something she could see clearly in the space between his composed expression and his eyes, the same eyes that had sat across from her in the library at midnight and decided, without any reasonable basis for the decision, that she was worth trusting. Elara, he said. Yes. I would like to court you, formally, properly. In whatever form that takes, given that you arrived in this house as a housemaid, and neither of us has behaved in any conventional fashion from the beginning. I understand that my position relative to yours is complicated, and that the last 2 weeks have involved an unusual amount of intensity, and that you may want time and distance before making any decisions about Cassian, she said. Yes. I fell asleep in your library and woke up to you sitting across from me with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world, and your first question was, how did you break my cipher? She looked at him with the same direct honesty she gave to everything that actually mattered. Not who sent you, not how dare you, not any of the things a man in your position had every right to say. You asked how I did it, because the thing you found most interesting was the thing I had done, not the threat I represented. She paused. That told me everything I needed to know about you. I have been making my decision about you ever since. He was very still. Court me, she said. Yes. The months that followed were not simple, because nothing in either of their lives had been simple, and they were not people who expected simplicity. There were the formal proceedings, the quiet hearing at which Elara gave her statement, the official record that acknowledged her role in the Beaulieu investigation without naming her publicly, the careful document filed by Hartley's office that established, to the satisfaction of the relevant authorities, that her 3 years of work had been conducted in good faith. There were the parliamentary matters, the reform bill that Cassian had been fighting for, which cleared the House of Lords in November and became law before Christmas. There was also the matter of Marchfield, who returned to Ashenmore in October for a shooting party and encountered, in the entrance hall, a woman he recognized as Elara Vane, who was no longer wearing gray, but standing in the hall in a deep green dress, her dark hair properly dressed, reviewing what appeared to be Cassian's correspondence files with the ease of someone entirely at home, and the Duke of Ashenmore at her shoulder, who looked at Marchfield with the flat, measured expression that had made 3 prime ministers reconsider their positions. Marchfield assessed this scene with the rapid intelligence of a man who had survived in politics for 20 years, said good afternoon to both of them with perfect composure, and did not, for the remainder of that shooting party, speak to Elara Vane at all, except in company and in the most conventional terms. Cassian watched this happen from across the room and said nothing, but she caught the expression on his face, and it was the closest thing to satisfaction she had yet seen on him. He proposed on a Tuesday in December, in the library. She had been expecting it in the abstract. They had been moving toward it steadily, with the same patient, precise momentum that characterized everything he did, but the specific moment surprised her, which she suspected had been his intention. She was working at the reading table, which had become her table, in practice, if not officially. He came in from his study at 9 in the evening, which was when he usually appeared, and he sat in his chair, which was across from hers, and he said, I would like to ask you something. She looked up from the document she was decoding. Then ask. He reached into his coat and set a ring on the table between them. It was not an ostentatious ring. Small diamonds, a pale sapphire, a plain gold band. the kind of ring chosen by someone who had thought about what the person wearing it would prefer, rather than what would make the most visible statement. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. "Elara Vane," he said, "who is not only Elara Vane but is, as I now know, Elara Constance Morrow, daughter of Captain Thomas Morrow, late of the Royal Intelligence Corps, trained in applied cryptography from the age of 14, in possession of a genuinely astonishing mind and the completely infuriating habit of being right approximately 92% of the time. 94, she said. "Will you marry me?" he said, "with the full knowledge that I am difficult and precise and not well suited to convention, and that this house will likely always have intelligence documents on the reading room table and ciphers in the correspondence drawer, and that I will notice when you are tired from your hands and not ask about it directly, but will adjust the workload regardless, and that I have no idea how to be anything other than what I am, but what I am is entirely and completely yours." She looked at him across the table. "Yes," she said. "Obviously, yes." He picked up the ring and came around the table, and he took her hand with the same careful, deliberate warmth that he had offered that morning on the London street, and he slid the ring onto her finger, and then he bent and pressed his lips to her hand, her wrist, and then he straightened and looked at her, and the composure was gone, just for this moment, just between them, and what was underneath it was everything she had suspected was there, fierce and devoted and completely certain. She kissed him, because there was nothing left to say that was more accurate than that. They were married in March, at Ashenmore, in the chapel on the grounds that had not been used for a wedding in 20 years. It was not a large affair. Cassian had no inclination toward spectacle, and Elara had no family in England beyond her work, which was itself a kind of family. Hartley came. Mrs. Dole wept with such visible emotion that it softened 11 years of formidable housekeeper reputation in a single morning. Two of the maids who had worked alongside Elara during her 8 weeks in the household sent flowers. Colonel Hartley, standing beside Cassian before the ceremony, said, "I spent 6 months on that cipher and she broke it in a night." 3 nights, Cassian said. She was also sleeping 2 hours a day and running a housemaid's shift. "Still," Hartley said. "Yes," Cassian said. "Still." There was a moment late on the evening after the wedding, when the house had grown quiet and the last of the small gathering had departed, and the library was lit by firelight only, and Elara was in her chair and Cassian was in his, and she was reading, and he was watching her, which she noticed in the way she always noticed, when his attention moved to her, some shift in the quality of the room, some change in the air. "What?" she said, without looking up. "Nothing," he said. "You're thinking loudly." "I am thinking," he said, "that I came home early from London because of a letter. And the letter was intended to remove you from this house. And if I had not come home early, if I had stayed the full week, if I had not found you asleep at that table, you would have found out eventually," she said. "You were already investigating, but not like this," he said. She set down her book. She looked at him across the firelit room, at the man who had sat across from her in this same room with a candle, and more patience than she had any right to expect, and had asked her a question about her work, rather than her guilt. "No," she said, "not like this." A silence. The fire settled. Outside, the March night was cold and dark and entirely indifferent, in the way of nights that have no particular opinion about what happens within the walls they surround. "I have a question," she said. "Yes, the first morning, in the study. You said you believed me. You said you believed I hadn't known Baloo's real purpose." She paused. "How could you know that, with absolute certainty, based on one night?" He was quiet for a moment. "I couldn't know it with certainty," he said. "I decided to believe it because it was the reading of the evidence that made the most sense to me, and because you were angry." "Angry?" "When I told you that someone in this house had been feeding intelligence about me for 11 months, he said. "You were angry, not concerned, not calculating, genuinely angry on my behalf. People do not generate that kind of anger for someone they are betraying." He met her eyes. "It was the anger that told me." She stared at him. "You made a decision about my character based on my emotional response," she said. "I made a decision supported by evidence and confirmed by your emotional response," he corrected, precisely. 94%, she said. "What?" "You said I'm right 92% of the time," she said. "It's 94. I've been counting." He looked at her for a moment with the expression that was still, after all this time, her favorite thing, the one that lived between composure and warmth, the one that was entirely, exclusively hers. "Show me your data," he said. Tomorrow, she said. Tonight I am not working. No, he agreed. Tonight you are not. He rose from his chair and crossed to hers and offered his hand, which she took, and they left the library together, the reading table with its documents, the firelight on the shelves of the books that lined the walls, the cipher papers neatly ordered, the lamp burning low, and the house settled around them with the deep, particular quietness of a place that has found its right inhabitants and knows it and is satisfied. There is a detail, noted by Hartley in his official report, that he chose not to include in the public record, but shared privately with two people only. The letter. The letter that had been sent to warn Cassian about Elara. The letter that had been the reason he came home early. The reason he found her in the library. The reason everything that followed was possible. The letter had been sent from Bola's London address. Bola's network, however, had not known about Elara until the 6th week. She had operated entirely undiscovered for 6 weeks. Nothing in the correspondence records, nothing in the network communications they recovered during the arrests, suggested that anyone in Bolu's operation had identified her before the 6th week. But the letter had been sent in the 7th week, meaning someone within that 1-week window had become aware of Elara and had chosen not to remove her directly, had instead chosen to send an anonymous warning to the one person most likely to find her and, as it turned out, to keep her. Hartley did not know who had sent that letter. The handwriting matched no one in the Bolu network. It did not match Lynn's. It did not match anyone they had in custody. He had shared this with Cassian and with Elara, and both of them had been silent for a different kind of moment. Elara had thought about her father, Captain Thomas Morrow, late of the Royal Intelligence Corps, who had died when she was 17 and had taught her ciphers at the kitchen table and had told her, once, that the most important skill in intelligence work was knowing who to trust and being willing to act on that knowledge before you could prove it. She did not know who had sent the letter. She had a feeling she would never know for certain. She decided in the end that it did not matter. Some things did not need to be solved to be true. If this story found its way into your heart, if you held your breath when Elara woke up across from him, if you smiled at 94%, if some part of you recognized what it looks like when two extraordinary people finally stop being careful, then you already know that the best love stories begin in the most impossible places. This has been the Royal Duke Diaries, where every secret has a price, every cipher has a key, and every soul guarded behind stone walls is waiting for the one person brave enough to break through. Thank you for staying until the very last word. Subscribe, come back tomorrow, and bring someone with you. The next story is already waiting.